I can't stop the. 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 Nothing I can see but you when you dance, dance, dance. Feel good creeping up on you, so just dance, dance, dance. All those things I shouldn't do, but you dance, dance, dance. Ain't nobody leaving soon, so keep dancing. Everybody say.
Okay, we checked all 4 systems, and there you go on modulation, all 4, and keying with a go.
Roger, you're loud and clear here also.
Discovery's 4 computers now have primary control of critical vehicle functions.
The second stage tanks now pressurizing, and we're coming up on the power transfer. Stages pressurized at this time. 10, 9. We have ignition sequence start. Engines on. 5, 4, 3, 2. All engines running. Launch commit. Liftoff. We have liftoff.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome NetApp Executive Vice President, Worldwide Field and Customer Operations, Henri Richard.
Good morning, everyone. I think you can do better than that despite the late evening. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you very much. What an event it has been. Are you ready for a little bit of space travel? That's what we're having this morning. But before we get to that, there's a few things I want to talk about. First and foremost, I want once again to thank all of our sponsors. And a special thank you for our premier partners, Cisco, Fujitsu, and Intel. Let's give them a round of applause. This event can exist because of them. As you know, NetApp has always been committed to a very strong partner ecosystem. So it's my pleasure to announce that today Veeam is announcing that they're extending their partnership with NetApp to include a deeper integration with ONTAP and also a complete integration with SolidFire. And you'll continue to see us committed to this strong partnership with all of the key leaders in the marketplace. So let's talk a little bit about what happened the last 2 days. I don't know about you, but I was absolutely blown away by the demonstrations yesterday. Were they great? I mean, many of you have come to me and said these were the best demos you've seen at Insight in its history. And you know, I was surprised. I was blown away, and I know already what's coming up. It was amazing. We have an incredible portfolio of solutions for all of you to demonstrate your data authority. Amazing things are happening at NetApp today. Really amazing things. And we've evolved to be uniquely positioned to be the world's data management partner. So we listened about Ken Kukier from The Economist, and he talked to us about how the data is truly becoming the world's most valuable asset. It's really becoming more precious than gold. And I was reflecting on the fact that it's ironic that at the beginning of the last century, the gold rush made Silicon Valley what it became, and that once again today, a lot of the companies that are creating this new gold from data are based in Silicon Valley. This is kind of the new gold rush. We heard, and I happen to agree, that in the not-too-distant future, you will see the intelligence that a company can extract from their data become an intangible asset on that company balance sheet. What a transformation. So at NetApp, we are poised to think big. And why is that? Well, first, we believe that digital transformation starts with human transformation. What do I mean by that? We're all transforming. I'm old. I've started in a world that didn't have the internet or tablets or smartphone. But think about the world we're walking into. Think about the people that will have buying power in their mid-20s that never knew a world without the internet and smartphone. Think about starting a business where your first customer is a digital customer and all the subsequent customers are all digital customers. How would your business be different? That is digital transformation. So we think that creating a digital future is just not about rearranging digital deck chairs. This is a lot more than change. And that's why you're hearing this word of transformation. To give you a metaphor, the way I think about change, change is making a caterpillar a faster caterpillar. Transformation is making a caterpillar into a butterfly. And Ken spoke a lot about what's happening in our culture, in our society, and in technology to drive these things. So from my perspective, I'd like you to think about how it's not how digital you are. It's about how you are digital. That's going to matter. But we must think bigger because data is exponentially exploding. We all know this. And it's difficult to project how big it's going to be in the future. As humans, we have a tendency to be linear thinker, and we struggle with exponential factors. Ken said that what's happening really requires a different mindset. I liked his phrase when he said change in scale for data is actually equating into a change in state. Because more data is not just more, it's different. I'll give you a personal example. I have a daughter that just finished her residency, and she's an ER surgeon. Do you know how many papers she would need to read monthly to stay current with her practice? 38,000. Do you know how long it takes Watson to read 38,000 papers? Less than a couple of hours. So there's some very, very profound changes that are happening in our society. And sometimes we're so close to them that it's difficult to take perspective. But AI is going to be an enormously transforming force, not only in technology, but in our society. So consider this. 90% of the data available online today has accumulated over just the last few years. By 2020, it is projected, and it's probably understated, that the world of digital data will be 40 zettabytes. And the most amazing thing in that transformation is that most of that data will not be produced by humans, but will be produced by machines in this evolution that we call IoT. So let's look at just one of the many examples of this. This is a flight tracker live that shows the flights currently in the air around Las Vegas. And this is over the US. At any given time, we've got 5,000 flights in the air in the United States alone. Now, we all know that these flights are now recording data. A Boeing 787 records about 0.5 terabyte of data on an average flight. I'm sure some of you have heard that there was an incident last weekend on an Air France Airbus 380 inbound to SFO. They blew a front fan on one of the engines. Can you imagine right now how many people are thinking that data is extraordinarily important? So we have to think bigger. And at NetApp, we're actually committed to helping you do just that. You see, we're focused on only one thing, helping you manage your data to extract the most intelligence out of it. So we want you to think big, but we want to help you to think bigger. And I believe that we are in a unique position in this industry to do this. And you're asking probably why. Well, let me share my view of the landscape of the industry today. On one side, you have two companies that I equate to department stores. Now, there's nothing wrong with department store. You use them, I use them. You get your shoes on the first floor, you get the shirts on the second floor, laptop carrying cases on the third floor. But you don't go to a department store when you want expert advice or the highest quality specialized product. You go there because of convenience. You can get most of what you want. It's not necessarily the best experience. You don't find necessarily the best solution or the best advice. It's an average experience. At the other end of the industry, you've got companies that have decided that storage and data management is not for them. And it's very clear when you look at their roadmaps and where they're going. Now, they've chosen a different path. They're going down the services path. But they're clearly not committed and don't have the R&D budgets and the roadmap to support your mission of becoming data management expert. And then, of course, you're going to say there's the startups, the new shiny things. The reality is that today, if they're public, they have a hard time getting back to their IPO price, and they have tremendous pressure to stop losing more money than they have revenue. And if they're private, you can see that they're struggling to get a round of financing at a significant discount from the previous round of financing. And Wall Street and private equity and VCs are slowly but surely growing impatient. So for them, the final outcome is pretty clear. It'll be acquisition or disappearance. And then there's us, with an industry-leading portfolio of products, probably the strongest we've ever had, with a cloud-enabled strategy that is undeniably ahead of the competition, with a customer-centric culture that's always been a tenet of this company, and with a balance sheet to support our innovative agenda and to give you the guarantee that we'll be there for you as a partner today and well into the future. So I'm asking you as you leave Insight to think about where do you put your efforts? Who do you partner with? Why is it more relevant than ever to be with us in this journey? I'm really excited that together, today, through some tough times where you stuck with us, we're able to deliver this vision. And we can together become the experts in changing the world with data. And it's really an honor for all of us to be part of this journey. Right now in this room, there's already some people that are doing amazing things with data. And our Innovation Awards honorees are truly innovating, transforming to unleash the power of data. So it's my privilege this morning to recognize some of those very special customers. And you'll see that there's a reason why these companies have chosen to work with us. To introduce the 4 finalists, please take a look.
If you want to pioneer change, reinvent business, and surpass expectations, it all starts with data. Data is at the heart of digital transformation, optimizing operations, enabling new customer touchpoints, and creating innovative business opportunities. The NetApp Innovation Awards recognize data visionaries who are breaking down barriers, challenging the status quo, and changing the world with data. Cerner is building healthier communities with advances in technology, providing instant and continuous access to a lifetime of data to help healthcare providers make fast, informed, and often life-affecting decisions. SafeLight is delivering unexpected moments of happiness, turning 100 times data growth into a faster, better, data-rich customer experience. Solus Mammography is changing the game through early detection of breast cancer, optimizing operations to drive down costs and make exceptionally accurate 3D mammography accessible and affordable to women everywhere. Technology One is enabling the digital revolution with a pioneering cloud strategy that delivers new ways to access applications and data, bringing new levels of productivity and mobility to customers.
These organizations are proof that a data-driven approach to digital transformation can make the difference between surviving or thriving. Please join me in giving one big round of applause to the 4 finalists. Now, as you know, the voting was in your hands. This is truly a democratic process. There were thousands of votes that were cast, and I know that the choice wasn't easy for you. It's my distinct honor to introduce the winner of NetApp's 2017 Innovation Award, Cerner. Please welcome the VP of Infrastructure and Operations at Cerner, Brian Stuckey. Hey, Brian. Great job, Brian. First, thank you for being here. Really appreciate the partnership. I know that Cerner is doing some amazing things with data in the medical field. So tell us maybe a little more about what you're doing around predictive analytics, and analysis.
Well, first off, thank you, Henri. Thank you, everybody who voted for Cerner and the finalists. This is really a testament to the thousands of associates at Cerner that come every day to work in order to drive our mission of transforming healthcare. So data analytics, predictive analytics, have a couple different lenses in my world. One is, if we look at our data center services, we're using some of tools within our industry. NetApp OCI is a great example of where we're using data to monitor our storage environment, our storage footprint, capturing that data, doing predictive analytics to determine where we're going to experience performance anomalies, and driving and making sure we correct those issues before we have customer impacting events. If I take a clinical lens to what we're doing with data, we've been digitizing the health records for decades now, and we sit on a wealth of data. Within healthcare settings, for example, we're running analytics and finding conditions that are very difficult for humans to correlate. Sepsis is a great example of how we're preventing deaths of tens of thousands of lives just by being able to look at the data and ensure that...
Your systems are already more capable than the physicians, basically.
It's a team effort.
Good answer. By the way, so you just say that you've been digitizing data for a very long period of time. What's kind of the size of your data set? It must be enormous.
It is. We started 20 years ago about really collecting and hosting data for our clients. Not too many years ago, we crossed the 10 petabyte range, and I thought that was pretty amazing. But our clients' data has grown exponentially, and we are now in the hundreds of petabytes, of data stored in our systems.
Thanks. And so, Brian, where do we go from here?
Well, you mentioned that your daughter, for example, has to read 38,000 journal entries in order to be a proficient physician going forward, which is an impossibility. So our job is to collect that information. Within our data are answers, and there's what works, what doesn't work, and really surfacing that data at the right time in order to empower people and physicians and clinicians around the world to save lives.
Brian, it's wonderful to be part of an organization that is truly changing the world with data. Once again, congratulations for being an Innovation Award winner. Thank you. Brian Stuckey. All right, so I promised you some space travel. Are you ready? I know you're all very anxious for our next speaker. It's just a perfect segue, talk about space travel or maybe even time travel. And who else comes to mind but our founder, the one and only Mr. Dave Hitz. Thank you.
Hi. I'm proud of you all. It's been an unusual week. On Monday, Tuesday, George said, Monday just disappeared, didn't it? George said, I want you all to come as your best selves. That's what we need. And I feel like that's exactly what I've felt in this conference. It's been awesome. I want to share a little bit of statistics. We had almost 5,000 attendees, 95% of the content we had planned was delivered. And even in normal times, it's not 100, right? So that's good. People really kicked in on the meals for the hurricane victims. We packaged 35,000 meals. And we had questions from people of, is there any way that we can give back to the local Las Vegas community? And in fact, here between NetApp and our partners and the attendees, we're almost up to $30,000 so far. So thank you. Thank you. Now I have a question. How many of you remember on live TV the Curiosity rover landing? Do you remember? This is the one where it came in and then like retro rockets came and it slowly comes down and then it lowers the rover on a rope. How many people watched that? And I remember looking at this thing going, that is fucking insane. There's no way that thing's gonna work. Whoever designed that must be a complete nutcase. And here's the thing about that. You're only a nutcase right up until it works. And then you're a visionary. And so I would like to invite out to stage the visionary whose team landed Curiosity on Mars. Welcome, Adam. Come on out.
Discovery, your goal for APU shutdown on time.
Good morning. This is Mars. And not just any place on Mars, a very special place on Mars. It's called the Gale Crater. It's a massive crater that sits on the equator of Mars, 90 miles across. You can see the edge of the crater rim in this image. This image is actually a height-correct digital elevation map rendered from satellite overflight data, assembled to give you a perspective of flying over the crater at about 40,000 feet. Rising out of the crater floor, you see the massive Mount Sharp, 15,000 feet tall, taller than anything in the continental US. Well, down there in the shadows, invisible to our eyes, between the proverbial rock and a hard place, between the crater floor and the foothills of Mount Sharp, is a rover named Curiosity. And it was my distinct pleasure, and in fact my greatest, most humbling professional experience, to lead the team that landed her there. Images like this used to keep me up at night, every night. At about 2:30 in the morning, I'd wake up and I'd worry about ways to die trying to get to the surface of Mars. But my story of helping land the rover on Mars doesn't start on Mars. In fact, my journey starts here. This is the San Francisco Bay Area. It's the Golden Gate Bridge. Many of you would recognize this. I was born and raised about a mile from where this image was taken. And it's apropos because actually of the stars that are shown in the upper left-hand corner of this image. That's the constellation of Orion. I didn't start my life as a wannabe engineer or even a really academically inclined individual. I was a very poor student in high school, terrible student in high school, in fact, and I barely graduated. And I was playing rock and roll in the San Francisco Bay Area for years. My friends all went off to college because they were smarty pantses, and I hung out and played rock and roll. And one night, returning home from playing a show, I noticed that the stars were in a different place in the night sky than they had been when I went out to the show. The stars were actually that constellation of Orion, big, boxy, and bright. I didn't know its name at the time. Clearly, I had not paid very good attention in high school. I'd missed that whole Earth spinning on its axis thing. And I was bewildered. I went out to the show, the stars were over the east. I came back from the show, they were over the west. What? I was curious, and I followed my curiosity. I allowed myself to follow that curiosity. Down to the local community college, College of Marin, and sign up for a class in astronomy to teach me why the stars were moving. It had a co-requisite of physics. I thought, physics? I'm not so sure. And then the fine print said, physics for poets, comma, physics without math. All right, I'll give it a try. Joke was on me, right? The astronomy course was canceled because there weren't enough students, and there I was in the physics class. But thank the fates that that was the case, because that took that spark of curiosity that I experienced in the apparent motion of the stars in the night sky, and it turned it into a fire of exploration that has burned across my life and changed the course of it. If Adam of yesterday were to have been told what Adam of today's job is, his head would explode, right? But thank God we never really know where our curiosity might take us. So I want to talk today about curiosity and exploration. In some sense, my life represents two parallel arcs of curiosity and exploration. I helped land a rover named Curiosity to explore for us in my professional life. And I started that journey of exploration sparked by my curiosity in my private life. So let's talk about Mars. Right? For eons, Mars has captivated our attention. From before we had aids to our vision, we looked up at the night sky and we saw a light a little bit redder, a little brighter than the other lights in the celestial sphere. When we first got aids to our vision, early telescopes, we looked up and we saw life. We saw roadways and canals. We saw civilization. And then we got better telescopes. And we realized that those are actually just natural features on the surface of Mars. But we never lost that idea that maybe Mars was alive. And that's understandable, right? It's kind of a profound question. Are we alone? Are we alone in our universe? Are we alone in our solar system? Could our nearest neighbor harbor life? Well, NASA's been trying to answer that question for years. Here is a family portrait of some of the rovers we've put on Mars to try and answer that question. We first landed on Mars in the 70s with fixed-legged landers, Viking, but we returned in '97 with a little tiny Sojourner rover, the size of a microwave oven. Important because we were able to get to the surface of Mars successfully for less than 1/10 of what we'd ever spent before. With that success, we vowed to go back to the surface of Mars every opportunity we could. They happen at 26-month intervals because of the motion of the Earth and Mars around the sun. Well, you can see there's a little bit more than 26 months between '97 and '04. To be honest, we were starting to play this limbo game. We're like, oh, that was cool. You did it for 1/10 the cost? Can you do it for lower? And the answer is no, you can't. No, can't be done. You can make a smoking hole on the surface of Mars for less than 1/10 the money. Yeah, not good. And you don't really get much partial credit, to be honest. So we rallied and we put twin rovers in 2004, Spirit and Opportunity, on the surface of Mars. They were important for this question of life and Mars because they taught us that liquid water had been on the surface of Mars. And we know from here on Earth that where there's liquid water, there's life. And when there's never been liquid water, we don't see evidence of life. But they couldn't tell us some important things about the water. Was it salty? Was it sweet, acidic, basic? In short, was that ancient aqueous environment, the ancient wet Mars, habitable for life? Well, in comes Curiosity. She's mammoth, 900 kilos, chock full of all the science instruments necessary to answer this question of habitability. But she is hard to land. Now, if you want to land on the surface of Mars, and you're taking anything bigger than a bread box or smaller than a house, you have to do 4 things. We call it entry, descent, and landing. That's 3 words. But really, there's 4 pieces to the puzzle. You hit the atmosphere. If you come from Earth, go into Mars, you hit the atmosphere going roughly 10,000 miles an hour. For landing night on Curiosity, we hit at 13,327 miles an hour. That's fast. In fact, that's so very fast that the energy of motion, the kinetic energy, can melt or vaporize the entire spacecraft. That is considered poor form. So we wrap the spacecraft in a special shell, and we coat it with material that will smolder and not burn, and we shed that kinetic energy to the atmosphere on Mars, burning a hole in the sky as we slow down. That process slows us down to about 1,000 miles an hour. Still not slow enough to land on the surface of Mars, so we need to open up a parachute. In our case, the world's largest supersonic parachute opened up just shy of twice the speed of sound at Mach 1.7. Opened up in this room, it's actually almost perfectly the diameter of this hall. Gives us a neck-snapping 12 Gs of deceleration. That slows us down to about, well, orders of magnitude 100 miles an hour. Actually, in specifics, about 183 miles an hour. Still not slow enough to land on the surface of Mars, so we go to rockets. Now, every expedition that's been successful to make it to the surface of Mars has done these 4 pieces of the puzzle. But depending on the size of the spacecraft, how fancy your rockets are, whether they've got throttles or not, what kind of sensor you have to look at the surface, you end up with what we call an error velocity, a little residual. 1, 5, 10, maybe 20 miles an hour. For us, for Curiosity, our big rover, it was 1.5 miles an hour. That's a brisk Manhattan walk. It's nothing. It's actually less than 1/3 of the arrival kinetic energy. And yet the engineering of that touchdown system, that last piece of the puzzle, gave us huge challenges. We started with airbags. We had landed with airbags with the little Sojourner and the twins, Spirit and Opportunity. Unfortunately, at 900 kilos, there's no real fibers known to humankind. No polyaramids, no Vectran, Kevlar, PBOs, you name it. Nothing, there's the fanciest stuff we got. Can't make fabric that can handle the loads. So we tried legs. We thought about legs. We landed on Viking on legs. We went to the moon with the Apollo lander on legs. Land on legs. Remember how we had that failure between 97 and 04? That was a legged lander. And we reminded ourselves just how tippy legged landers are on uneven and uncertain terrain. Put a 900-kilo rover on top of it, and you got tippiest still. So that was out. We tried to solve the tippiness problem by spreading out multiple legs and allowing the lander to do a belly flop. That worked for stability. Now, our fuel tanks are in the belly of the beast, and our fuel monomethylhydrazine is annoyingly toxic when we work with it here on Earth, and of course it's very explosive. Exploding on touchdown, also considered super uncool. So then we armored up the belly of the beast to protect the tanks from rock strike, and by the time we were done with that, it was basically too heavy to launch. So in the summer, Indian summer of 2003, we gathered together everybody who'd ever worked on a successful Mars mission in a not very well air-conditioned room at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And for a few sweaty days, we tried to brainstorm that 4th piece of the puzzle, how we were going to finally get the big rover, which we knew we had to land for all the science instruments, safely on the surface of Mars. And we came up with this idea. We called it direct placement, but very quickly people used the vernacular, the sky crane, and we knew a few things when we exited that room. One, that sound engineering principles had brought us to that choice. And that two, as Dave suggested, we would lose credibility when we spoke about our choice. In fact, I was frequently the one losing the credibility. I got kind of tired of losing the credibility, to be honest. I came up with a pithy little statement, I would say, before I'd ever start to speak of the sky crane. It goes like this: great works and great folly may be indistinguishable at the outset. Now, I love statements like this. This statement is both true and simultaneously meaningless. And those are, of course, the best things to say. Its truth is maybe obvious. If something's very, very new, right, you won't have a frame of reference with which to judge it or understand it, and it will appear crazy. The meaninglessness of the statement is, of course, that crazy also looks crazy. So just because you say something like this doesn't mean that the next words out of your mouth are not completely whack. Although I can tell you and promise you from personal experience, if you say those words into a room full of people, then no matter what comes out of your mouth, they're like, ah, whoa, Now, unfortunately, the whole team labored under the hanging question that this leaves, right? Because we couldn't test our landing system. We live on the third rock from the sun, not the fourth rock from the sun. We have the wrong surface gravity. We have the wrong atmosphere makeup. We have the wrong amount of atmosphere, wrong Mach number, you name it. Nothing works for us here. We cannot test our landing system. We can do analysis, which we do. Pen and paper at first. Eventually, computer simulation. Here is one of millions of computer simulations which we conducted. Here we're landing the rover on a slope so slippery it can't even rove, and yet we can land her successfully. Results like this buoyed our confidence that maybe what we are doing might be a great work and not a great folly. But simulation, modeling in general, simulation in particular, they have some deficits. They don't protect against sins of omission, the I forgots. If I build a model of the universe in my computer with ones and zeros, and I omit an important law of physics, the computer won't tell me that I omitted that law of physics. It'll just turn the crank dutifully on this weird adjacent universe I've created inside of its bowels and pop out an answer that may or may not have anything to do with what we should reasonably expect to find when we try and land on Mars. So when it came right down to it, the whole team had one test. It was an expensive test. It was $2.5 billion, one time, conducted on the surface of Mars. We gathered the team together on the 5th of August of 2012, and we collectively held our breaths. And inside our brains, we were asking the question, had we done a great folly, or perhaps a great work?
Coming up on entry. Vehicle reports entry interface. At this time, it will begin pressurizing the propulsion system to increase the thrust of the system. We'll use that for all the maneuvering in the atmosphere we're about to do. The vehicle has just reported via tones that it has started guided entry. Target status. We have seen peak deceleration. We should have parachute deploy around Mach 1.7. The parachute is deployed. We are decelerating. Heat chill has separated. We're found the ground. We're down to 90 meters per second at an altitude of 6.5 kilometers and descending. Standing by for back shell separation. We are in powered flight. We're at an altitude of 1 kilometer descending. Standing by for Sky Crane. Sky Crane has started.
Signal to us, you remain strong.
Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars. Time to see where our curiosity will take us.
So, that was a good night. Infinitely preferable to the alternative that could have awaited us if the efforts of over 3,170 women and men at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and thousands others across 37 states and 7 countries hadn't come together perfectly to make that happen. Now, I know for myself, and I know for many of my colleagues, that the numbers that come down, the ones and zeros, that they tell me that the rover, the robot, it's done its job, that takes the front of my brain to put together. It doesn't have the visceral connection to the basic decade of investment that we had as these do. These are the first images from a new place in our solar system brought to you by, frankly, the blood, sweat, and tears of those women and men across the lab, across the nation, and around the globe. They are, from the right, moving to the left, the first image of Mount Sharp seen from the surface of Gale Crater. This has taken a couple of days after we've landed. We've removed the clear dust covers that protected the lenses of the cameras, and we see a beautiful crisp image, or as crisp as it gets, of Mount Sharp standing 15,000 feet in the background, the rover's shadow in the foreground, and in the mid, a beautiful set of black sand dunes that separated us from the foothills of Mount Sharp. In the center, we see the first color image from the surface of Gale Crater. This is taken a few days after landing, but we have not removed the clear dust cover that protects the lens, and the red iron oxide dust that gives Mars its red appearance gives this image a ghostly red hue. But my favorite image thus far from the entire mission is the one on the far left. That's the very first image from the surface of Gale Crater. We had a satellite orbiting Mars, telemetering all the data you saw us responding to in the control room came through what we call a bent pipe link through the Odyssey spacecraft. And we were just about to lose that link, and we thought we might have enough time and enough bandwidth for one image. And that's the image we chose. It's from the rear hazard cameras. These are fisheye lens cameras on the back of the rover that protect it from bumping into things when it's driving on the surface. We haven't removed the dust cover. We're just moments after landing, but we were hoping at that time, for that moment, looking in that direction with the fisheye, we might, just might, see that. Now, I know what you're thinking. Whoa. It's as impressive to you as it is to me. I get that. It's pretty clear. You might have to trust me, but that's actually the plume, the impact plume of the descent stage, our jet backpack impacting the surface. You remember we came down to about 75 feet above the surface of Mars. We lower the rover below its jet backpack. The two descend until the surface of Mars takes up the weight of the rover. And then we cut the descent stage free, and we fly to the back of the rover. That's why we looked out the rear haz cams, a safe distance to impact the surface. We got it, an action selfie of the landing. I mean, that's pretty cool. On the numbers, it was a good night. The red, the green, and the black are variously where we thought the rover would land once we knew it was contacting the atmosphere, where the rover thought it had landed, and where the rover actually did land. They're separated by a couple hundred meters. Not super awesome if you're playing golf, but if the golf shot's 352 million miles, that's pretty darn good. So it was a fantastic celebration for us, a real celebration of collaboration, right? We humans are interesting creatures. We may think brilliant thoughts, or certainly I don't know about you, but every time I think a thought, the moment it crystallizes in my mind, it is the most brilliant idea anybody has ever thought of through all time. And that poor thought has a future that's pretty dismal, because the only thing that happens is it gets less and less good as it contacts the real world, until sometime where I may disavow ever having anything to do with it, or maybe it sort of levels out at some permanent utility and maybe it survives. We had an incredible group of collaborators who could allow those ideas to be thrown upon one another and against one another, that would allow us to come up with this fantastic scheme that looked crazy but actually worked. We had a great time. But NASA's not all hugs and kisses. 30 days after we landed, we took this image. This is a panorama of the bottom of the rover. Make sure we hadn't landed her on any rocks. If we'd landed her on a big rock, I probably wouldn't be here right now. And then they patted the landing team on the back and said, okay, go get more work, because we were basically the movers, right? We're just like, okay, here's your rover, have fun. And a whole new team of folks came to drive the rover for its 2-year mission. They made beautiful choices, and within 6 months of into its 2-year mission, we had taken images, we had deployed the arm, we had drilled into the surface of Mars, pulled out rocky material, distributed it into the belly of the beast where the science instruments are, and given the scientists back here on Earth the answer to the question that Curiosity was sent to ask. The question is, was ancient Mars habitable? And the answer is yes. 3.5 million years ago, when life was first starting here on Earth, the conditions to support life were ripe on Mars. Interestingly, we actually know at that time, the late early bombardment, the two planets were communicating with material being ejected from collisions back and forth between the planets. We don't know if life started on Mars and life started on Earth simultaneously, whether life started on Earth, was ejected to Mars and flourished for a little bit, or we might find it still today, or whether life started on Mars, was ejected to Earth, and we're all Martians. I know that sounds funny, but that's actually a possibility. So, awesome mission. You guys are kind of data heads, so what about the data? Really impressive. 500 megabits per day. Megabits per big second, we call a day on Mars a sol. 500 megabits a sol, that's a good day for us. Dial-up modem data rates directly to Earth, pretty decent for moments during a pass of an orbiter. We only really need about 75 megabits a day to figure out what's going on with the rover and what we're going to do with the rover later. And finally, the entire summation of all of the data that we have taken could easily fit on my now quite old 6 iPhone. So planetary exploration of robots is all about data, but there are very little volumes of data. We have to choose very wisely what we bring back down. So here she is. Her name's Curiosity. She's doing our Curiosity's bidding on the surface of Mars. I love this image, but it leaves me with a question. Why do we do this? Why did I do this? Why did I spend 8 years of my life, 9 years of my life, designing a rover, or designing a landing system to root around in the dirt on another planet? Is it a particularly practical thing to do? I don't know. Sometimes when I think about human behavior and practicality, I get a little confused. Some things I know to be practical. This is practical. Not the selfie, but the 737-700 in the background. That will take me from Bob Hope Airport, where I can still take a selfie with my airplane, to Houston Hobby Airport outside the gates of the Johnson Space Center. That flight takes me 3 hours and 15 minutes. When my mother was my age, that flight probably would have taken 3 days, or that drive would have taken 3 days. And when her mother was my age, it would have taken 3 weeks. Air travel's completely revolutionized the way we think about our society, the way we move goods and services. You all came from a wide range of geographic locations, and most of you flew here. But if you look at the early exploration of flight, you don't see a big foreshadowing of the important impact that it's going to have on society. In fact, early exploration of flight looks a little awkward. It scares horses. Evidently, if you want to explore the air, you must be prepared to swim. Our early explorers should be embarrassed, and some of them downright humiliated. I don't really know what this guy was thinking. And too frequently, they always paid with the greatest of possible prices. And yet we kept at it. Awkward, stunted, dangerous, we kept at it until eventually we tamed the skies, driven to explore them. So we don't explore because it's practical. In fact, we explore despite it being impractical. Do we do it for the grand science question, the laudable, noble science question? This is Times Square on Monday, the 6th of August at 1:30 in the morning. That's when we are landing. It was on the East Coast. It was Monday morning. I love Manhattan. Used to have a flat there. City that never sleeps. But if it's going to take a nap, 1:30 in the morning on a Monday is probably a pretty good time. Thousands of people gathered around to watch us land on the big jumbo screen. Now, are they there because they're just dying to know about the pH and salinity of the ancient aqueous environment on Mars? I don't think so. I don't think, at least, not only that. I think it's more akin to when thousands of people watch to see if an athlete can cross a set distance at a fraction of a second faster than another athlete. I think when we explore, we're asking questions about ourselves as individuals, as teams, as a nation, as a people. We're asking questions about our potential. What is the edge of us? What can we do? I think Neil Armstrong understood that when he chose to say the words he would first say when he stepped foot on the moon. One small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. He was hinting that he was carrying us with him, that his exploration was in fact our exploration. And as he became more with the juxtaposition of that tiny footprint against the vast backdrop of space, we all became more. When we explore, we're asking questions of humankind. Who are we? How grand are we? How great is our reach? What questions might we ask and dare to find the answers? Now, I've been thinking a lot about exploration, mostly since landing. Before landing, I just had this cool job. We landed, people freaked out. I'd be in an airport, people would say, "Ah, you're the Mars landing guy." I'd say, I'm one of the Mars landing people. And this would happen in other states and in other countries. And I started to recognize that this exploration thing we do is an expression of ourselves. Curiosity, which drives it, is in our genes. You know, born through hips too narrow to pass a fully baked human brain, we come into this world relatively unprogrammed, naked and incapable, with very few lines of code, perhaps the most important being, be curious. And we all are. Every single one of us in this room is curious, and every single one of us in this room started at time zero, the moment we were born, started building a model of the universe created solely by exploration and experiment, driven by your curiosity. I have a 1-year-old son. He knows the difference between a solid and a liquid, mass, gravity, time, distance, all wordlessly before he could speak. Now, an interesting thing happens as we get older. We tend to drop some of that curiosity. We tend to rely on the model that we started building at time 0, and we lose opportunities. If we keep our minds curious, if we keep our minds almost childlike in how they view the world freshly, we stay agile, competitive, and innovative. That curiosity is part of who we are. That active exploration is sort of an essence of our humanity, and through it, we change our world. So what's next for NASA? Where's NASA next going to explore? Well, the scientists of this nation have told us for many years that to really understand the questions, to unlock the secrets of Mars, we have to bring a piece of Mars back to Earth. It's called Mars Sample Return, and it is a lot of work. It takes 3 separate missions spanning several years, but NASA's stepping up. We're doing the first of those missions. It's called Mars 2020. It launches in 2023. No. It launches in 2020, and it will go and take a carbon copy of Curiosity, but this time with a sampling system on the front that will take core samples out of the rocks of Mars and seal them in hermetic sealed containers for eventual return to Earth. I am honored to be the chief engineer of that mission. But Mars is not the only place to explore. Europa, the ice moon of Jupiter, a thin ice crust, 1, 2, 5, 10. We don't really know how thick, how many miles thick it is, but we do know that underneath that ice, protected by the ice from the harsh radiation environment of Jupiter, is a saltwater liquid ocean more than twice the volume of all the seas on Earth. Now, I'm no exobiologist, but I drink beer with exobiologists. They tell me that Europa is their #1 bet to find life existing in our solar system today. And I hope to help NASA put a rover or a lander on the surface of that ice to look for evidence of that life. So now, when I look at this image, it doesn't keep me up at night. My 1-year-old boy Ansel keeps me up at night now. This image opens a question for me, though, as sometimes they do. You know, where will my curiosity next take me? Years ago, when I allowed myself to follow my curiosity, it sort of changed the course of my life. It changed what I did, and maybe I changed what we do. Over the years, as I've worked with people, I find that if I can help us, all of us, collectively as a team, as an organization, keep our curiosity alive, we pick solutions that are better, more profound, more innovative, and more competitive. So it's a useful question to ponder. It's probably best pondered and left unanswered, hanging in your mind's eye, open. Where will your curiosity next take you? Thank you very much for your attention.
For someone like me, you are like the Pope.
Wow.
And so I would like to ask you to forgive my sin. I watched the Curiosity lander that night. I was with my brother, and the two of us were drinking wine, and also there's some rule about the peanuts.
Oh,
Can
yeah.
you explain the peanuts? Everyone's supposed to eat peanuts.
Oh, we have a long-standing tradition that started with launches where you would eat peanuts. There was a moment when we ate, years ago, decades ago, where we had some launch failures. Randomly, team members ate peanuts prior to the launch of the next successful launch. And after that, our very rational engineering minds got locked into this voodoo.
Clearly.
Yes, that you must eat peanuts. And so now we eat them in the morning, we eat them in the evening, we eat them though before each launch and actually prior to the landing.
So here's the forgiveness that I need. My brother and I did not know about this tradition. We were informed by the TV, so we go scrambling in the kitchen and pistachios. And so my question is, was I helping or hurting?
You've got the whole problem that a peanut is not a tree nut. But a pistachio is a California thing, and we are a California organization, so I think you were helping.
Your story reminded me of a story from my childhood. When I was about 7, my family went car camping in the Anza Borrego Desert. I know you like to do desert camping with your kids. And we put the sleeping bags outside, and my dad was immediately next to me in the sleeping bag next door. And I woke up around 3 in the morning, and I looked up, and I remembered the moon had been there, and now the moon was there, and it was like, Dad, 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 look, the moon, it's moved. Dad was not impressed.
Right. Yeah, it's amazing.
What are the odds, do you think, that a human being alive today will touch the Curiosity rover again?
Well, it's a question of will. In terms of technology, we have more technology in our hands today than...
What are the odds that a human will touch the rover?
How curious are we? The answer to that question is the answer to the odds question.
The reason I asked is this. We talk a lot about data in this, and it occurs to me, a lot of science, you go collect something physical, you do something, you bring back the samples, you get the stuff. If you think about most of the science that JPL does, it's not a question of is the data important? The data is all there is.
Yeah.
It's just the data that matters.
Yeah, we never get to see that spacecraft again. You pat it on the back, and it goes, and it's gone forever. And we live and die on the data. In fact, we have strict rules. The data is actually your all data. We work for the people of the United States, and so we have to strictly get all that data out to you because it's our tax dollars at work, and the data is the only product.
In retrospect, I can't imagine why I agreed to speak after Adam. But that said, thank you so much.
Thank
Another
you,
hand.
Dave. Thank you very much.
Okay, now the boring part will resume. Back to Earth, or at least the clouds. These days, I talk to a lot of customers. And almost always when I talk with customers, what I'm curious about now is how are they thinking about the cloud? What are you doing with the cloud? And it's a good question because it's very open-ended. Some people tell me about the private cloud they're going to build. Some people tell me about what they're doing in a public cloud, or yesterday someone was like, actually, we're a cloud provider. You got to be careful who you ask that question to. And I've had a lot of conversations, and I've started having a particular way of structuring conversations about the cloud, and I'd like to share that with you. And it really started with a particular vice president of a large insurance company. And I asked him this question, and he said, well, never mind the cloud. Let me describe, he was the VP of infrastructure. He said, let me describe my mental model of what the moving parts of our infrastructure are and where we're headed. And he said, there's 3 categories. The first category is configured. You design the environment and really carefully, like this, like I want this kind of a server and this big and this many disks, and I'll wire up the fiber channel like this, and very much designed. Actually, he used the word bespoke. He was a Brit. And it had this sort of whiff of like, Her Majesty's data center. So I changed it to configured. But that was very much the traditional design, client, server, Unix, Windows, Linux, fiber channel, Ethernet, like all this different stuff. A lot of server virtualization, certainly, VMware. But typically, like this will be the Oracle zone. This one is for virtual desktop. So that is the configured stuff. And then he said the second category that I think of is, he called it private cloud. He said it's very uniform. It's 1U servers, just all of them 1U, mostly just the same. Ethernet to the top of the rack. Very uniform, software-defined kind of a model. Very flexible, very dynamic. And then the final zone was the public cloud. And so we went to the whiteboard. I drew a picture, and I've ended up drawing this picture a lot. And so I'd like to walk you through it. You can actually see over there is Earth, and there's Mars. So that's not going to work. So here's the picture in PowerPoint. Configured, private cloud, public cloud. And he had goals. His goals were 30%, 30%, 40%. And we started talking, but that's not actually why I'm sharing this yet. Here's what I found so interesting. The 3 areas that he defined as what he wanted to accomplish lined up perfectly with how we were doing our investments and the areas we thought were important to customers. You've seen it time and time again in this conference. You've got a traditional data center, client, server, Unix, fiber channel, configuring it up, and you want to modernize it. That's what Octavian talked about. We want it to have flash. We want it to have storage class memory. NVMe would be nice. It would be good if we could have all those things without throwing the old stuff away and bringing in the new stuff. Like, that's what that whole piece is about. And then we've got the private cloud. We would say next generation data center, the 1U racks just up to the top, all uniform configured, HCI, SolidFire. Maybe it needs object storage, because that's that next zone of the world. And finally, the public cloud. And so it's just like, oh my God, the stuff we're saying actually aligns with what customers want. How cool is that? Yeah, that's what I just said. I have reminders for myself, like in case, I choke up. So I would like to describe my favorite use case, simply because it allows me to say the words interplanetary internet. There's Earth, there's Mars, there's the rover, there's the satellite, and the data comes back down. If you can't see, that's Pasadena, JPL, where Adam works. Last year, we actually described the use case that they were working on at that time was simply to get, and Joe mentioned this yesterday, to get the data from their data center in JPL into the cloud. And they're perfectly happy with their data in JPL. In fact, they are government mandated to maintain their data there and very safe. But they wanted to get it into the cloud to do research there, more analytics, bigger data kind of stuff. Now, what they're working on and what we're partnering them to figure out is the next step, which is they want to distribute the data through the cloud to the groups that look at the data, and then have those groups be able to use the compute in Amazon, again, to process and chunk their data. That's their goal now. So I just like, as I said, interplanetary internet. But also this, to me, really highlights that the data fabric isn't just about, are you in the cloud or are you on-prem? Often it's about connecting those two. Here's another thing that we're working on. I'm just kind of digging in on things we've been doing in the cloud. You got all of these demos yesterday, but just like at a high level, just how do we think about it? Another area is this whole idea of data in the cloud. A lot of people love their data in the cloud. But then there's other people that say, yeah, this data, not so much. Healthcare is an example sometimes, or government, or maybe your internal lawyers, or maybe you're just scared, who knows? But so put the data next to the cloud. And partnering with Equinix, or depending on your own data center's distance from Amazon or Azure or whatever. And once you do this, it opens up such interesting possibilities, because now your data is also accessible from another cloud. Right, so these are the kinds of investments we're doing here. So public cloud, again, if it's Amazon, if it's Azure, if it's IBM, SoftLayer, Bluemix, Google platform, you're not confused about that. Of course it's public cloud. So coming back to this picture, the trickier one is between the left two. Once upon a time, if all you were doing was running VMware and you had some virtual machines, people would go, whoa, that's so next gen. Like, that's definitely a private cloud. And now the bar's a lot higher, right? What exactly does private cloud mean? And one of the ways, when I first encountered this, in fact, when we were acquiring SolidFire, part of my thinking back then was, it's a lot about the applications. And there is an affinity of certain categories of applications with the private cloud model, with the next generation data center. It tends to be a whole bunch of CPUs, all relatively small and uniform. And so applications designed for that environment, apps like Hadoop, MongoDB, Couchbase, all of these apps where you can just I need 10 times more performance, I'll go from 10 CPUs to 100 CPUs, or 10 times again, 1,000 CPUs, like that model. But when I was talking to Dave Wright from SolidFire, I kept asking about the applications, and finally he said, I really like this analogy, he said, when Amazon sells you a virtual machine, do you think they care what you put in it? It's like, he said, half of our business is things like Oracle and SQL Server running on VMware. And so I kept focusing on the app, and I was thinking about it wrong. And I've got a new way of thinking about it now. It's much more about the feeling. So imagining you're helping somebody decide, should they buy an iPhone or a PC? I never mind an iPhone, but just any smartphone. You wouldn't ask them questions like, well, do you want to send email? You can send email with the iPhone, you can send email with the PC. And you wouldn't say, well, what about, do you want to be able to make a spreadsheet? You can do that on both. You have to ask them what they want it to feel like. As you send your email, would you like to be standing on a subway with your elbow around the pole as the subway's jerking? In that case, I recommend a phone. Would you like to sit down for 3 hours straight to plow through all of that email from the week you were out of work? For that case, I recommend a PC, right? It feels different. And so I want to show how this feeling works in what constitutes private cloud. And so this is a picture of a SolidFire cluster. And you can see 4 1U nodes. That's the minimum cluster size. It's 100% full. And that's bad, right? We all know that's bad. Didn't take Jeff Baxter to teach me that. So we add 1 more node. We tell the cluster, absorb that node. And the cluster thinks for a little while. And then here's what happens all by itself. That was like 2 hours of PowerPoint right there, just so you know. Hang on, let's go back. Thank you. I'll be here all week. The thing about that is you don't get to tell it where to put the data. You don't have any input at all. It thinks, it crunches, it decides where it should go. Now, this is hard for me to say because clustered ONTAP's my baby, right? ONTAP's so awesome, and you can move data anywhere you want transparently, but you do have to help figure out where it goes, right? This flowing just like liquid is a different characteristic. Or if we add 3 more nodes, now we're going to have 8 nodes with the capacity that previously was on 4. So they're going to go to 50%. This one I'll just do once. And we even have customers, they'll say, oh, look, we thought it was going to grow. We were scared it was going to grow too fast. We really filled it up. Now it's 3 months later. It's still at 50%. I'm not going to animate this one, but you could pull 3 of them out. I mean, you should tell it first, and it'll drain the water back out, and then you can ship them somewhere else. We call it Fedex load balancing. This is designed for a particular feel, which is I am running a pool of compute and storage, and I need for it to be flexible and fluid, and I don't know what's going to happen, and maybe more will come in, and maybe some will leave, and that's the feeling of the next generation data center. And for HCI, just add compute. Obviously, it's much more work than that. You saw the demo yesterday. But I will say, the philosophical approach that we took with our HCI is we said, no animations here, we said VMware does a very good job of making compute flow like water. That's not the problem anymore. They've done a great job. The problem is the data behind it. That's where we think people have really struggled to make a scalable, flexible, multi-load, enterprise, big HCI. Start small, go very large with the kind of data management. So that's where we focused. And you see, yep, it's VMware right on top. That's how you manage it. That's the choice we've made, and it's how we think we bring value to that. OK, so we're back to the 3 boxes. And let me turn it back into a whiteboard. So remember, VP of infrastructure at a very large insurance company. We're back to that part of the story. And I was trying to understand what exactly did he mean by this 30, 30, 40? And I was like, it can't be capital budget, because the public cloud is no capital budget. Or is it like the number of applications? Or is it how much developers supporting? And he didn't really have good answers. I was like, what? It didn't seem fully thought out. And finally, I said to the guy, well, where are you now? And he said, oh, now we're 100, 0, 0. Anybody else there? It's fine. We are where we are, right? And so then it was like, oh, okay, well, what's your problem? What are you trying to solve? Why did you set these goals? And what he said was, my sense is that we are running 100% of our environment on the least flexible, least efficient, least modern style of stuff. I was like, well, you should talk to Octavian. He can help you with that. But he also said, you know, I believe it would be healthy for us to have some of these other styles. And so I said, oh, so you kind of said a third, a third, a third, but don't be thinking that right one smaller third. I'm going to make a bigger third. And now it was like, you know. So we talked about that. Yeah, we can help. Now I kind of knew the zone, but we're talking the infrastructure layer, very infrastructural. We've got Linux, we've got Windows. You can move it around. Maybe we could use SolidFire here, ONTAP Select if you need file services. We've got ONTAP in the cloud. Like, well, whole conversation. We can help it. I understand where you're coming from. Let's have a conversation. Finally, we can talk about some products. And because one of my goals is to not talk too much about products. Like, first, let's set the stage. And then something really interesting happened. One of the other people who was in the meeting, who reported to this VP of infrastructure, he said, hey, boss, should I tell him about the shadow IT survey? Anybody here done a shadow IT survey? So remember, 0%, but the actual amount of Amazon that they were using was 40,000 cores worth. That rounded to 0. Big company. And it was an interesting story. They had a group of people, insurance company, they figured out how to solve this actuarial problem, and nobody had figured out how to do it within their own data centers. But they could go to Amazon, fire up a boatload of CPUs, crunch, 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 within a few hours get back the solution, and they were heroes. They were complete heroes. And they did it again, and they were heroes again, and they did it again, and they were heroes again, and they did it again, and they were a big budgetary problem. And he was saying, one of my goals is I'd like to bring this stuff back into the private cloud, because it's turned from a really bursty experimental load, which is perfect for public cloud, to a constant fixed load that I'm going to be doing for the next 5 years, clearly growing, which that one, I won't say that that necessarily means it should be private cloud, but the odds are better. If you're going to run 1,000 CPUs for a week, the odds are pretty good public cloud is the best solution, right? Turns out HP doesn't take them back. But if you know you've got a continuous load for the next 5 years, then the odds are higher that on-prem makes sense. So anyway, so that was, so he wants to bring it back. And I said, whoa, 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 everything down at the infrastructural layer, yeah, that's pretty straightforward. You get up to the PaaS layer, and all of a sudden, depending what services you're using, depending how your developers developed it, it may or may not be convenient to bring back. And so, you know, there's a lesson from this, which is where you can go next depends on where you are. And you need to think about that. That's part of the strategy implications of all of this movement in the cloud. And I'll talk more about this. We can still help, but you also need to keep in mind what's going on. So let me switch from this conversation. I'm going to switch to a new one. Now, this was a CIO at a very large bank, a New York bank. And he was much further along the journey towards cloud. He had a DevOps team, and they were doing a lot of development. And he had concluded the effectiveness of his DevOps team was absolutely critical for his bank's competitiveness. They needed to move faster, be more efficient. And one of his key goals was, I want my team to be as happy and productive as they can be. And, you know, we talked about team dynamics and, you know, how do you keep engineers happy? Take them to Vegas. So anyway, we had a conversation. And then he told me another one of his goals. He said, whatever the team develops, I would like it to be able to run in my own private cloud and also on any of the public clouds, or at least a couple of them. And that's not crazy. There's this, people have different names, infrastructure as a service plus. And it's this sort of layer of next generation services, things like Kubernetes, OpenStack. You can run Kubernetes on any of the clouds. You just get the source code and just put it in. Things like MongoDB, Cassandra, all of those kind of, there's this whole collection, Hadoop services that we think of in that category. There's companies that specialize in this. A number of vendors have a layer that you can put in there. And so it's certainly possible. But here's what I told him. I said, I think your goal number 2, multi-cloud for everything, conflicts with goal number 1, which is happy developers as productive as possible. Because these private cloud environments, public cloud environments, I mean the platform as a service, they are some of the most innovative, most productive, fastest moving, best places to do your work. And if you don't let your developers take advantage of them, you'll be unhappy. And I made this analogy. Look at the SaaS layer. If you're running in Salesforce, they're not going to give you the code to run in your own data center. You chose lock-in, right? You were happy with that. Maybe not happy with it. Let me put it differently. You accepted cloud lock-in because it added value. And my argument was not that you should seek lock-in, but you should look, where does it make sense to use the multi-cloud approach? And where does it make sense? And let me give you an example. If you want to use Watson, you're going to use SoftLayer. Watson's pretty cool. If you want to use Lambda, you're going to use Amazon. That's pretty cool, right? It depends what you're doing. And so you should make decisions and maybe use multiple different ones for things. For a particular thing you need to accelerate. That's part of this whole plan. Okay. I have a question. Any of you ever get tired of PowerPoint? I have this fantasy. What if there was such a thing of whiteboard as a service? Whiteboard on demand. Where is Nito from Brazil when I need him? That is how a consumption model should feel.
I love this company! Sipa!
I told you I'd been drawing this a lot. So up until now, I've really been focusing on these swim lanes. Is it IaaS or IaaS Plus or PaaS? And applications that you could move from one place to another, and the data matches. And so it's fun. We can literally move the app from my configured environment to my private cloud to Amazon, Azure, Google, back again, SoftLayer. But sometimes it actually makes sense to move data across swim lanes. Think about the JPL example. In the JPL example, they had data in an on-prem data center in NFS, and they wanted to apply Amazon analytics to that data. And so they took the connector that Joe demoed last year and said, we will connect NFS to objects, keep them synchronized, and get the data from here to here. So what I love about that is we're cutting across layers, we're cutting across data centers, cutting across styles of data center, and we're doing it not because the app can move, but because that same data can be useful to multiple apps in different environments. Or think about what Joe demoed yesterday. He demoed on-prem NFS data being synced into Azure and hooked using the hook for Hadoop that lets you take NFS data directly into Hadoop instead of objects. It's not that NFS is better than objects, but if the data's already NFS, why keep it twice? Just expose it directly to Hadoop. So here's that line. Or here's one I especially like. I believe we demoed this one last year, but this is cloud control. And the idea of cloud control is you've got your data in Office 365, your mail. And they've got their own backup for DR purposes. But suppose you have a particular user, and for some reason that user, legal issues, his data, we want a complete copy of that and keep it safe. What Cloud Control will let you do is take the data from the 365 into an object format. Might be S3 on AWS, might be storage grid in your own private cloud. You see how I'm starting to link all of this stuff up? My favorite demo from yesterday was the demo that was part of HCI. It was the storage grid, and it was the photos going into storage grid, and that was on-prem, and then being operated on by Amazon. And man, that thing flew by so quick. And I know not everyone, I've talked to people, not everyone was in that yesterday. So let me just describe what was going on. You are putting photos in objects in a local bucket. We have wired together our local bucket into Amazon's notification service. So every time a new object hits the local bucket on-prem, Amazon's notification service is alerted, and you can hook that to Amazon's Lambda, the serverless computing, that like no server, you just say, here's the function I want you to call. And the function they had to call was, go look at that on-prem object, use the Amazon face recognizer, figure out, is it happy, is it sad? It'll tell you the age, the gender, and then take that metadata and write it back to your on-prem bucket. Is that cloud? Is that private? Is that, I'll show you where the line goes. The line goes from here to here. You can imagine maybe you had a SaaS application that had lots of sales data about your customers. Wouldn't it be nice if Watson would tell you who to call next? Anyway, that's enough lines. You get the idea. If someone said, Dave, help me understand, what exactly is data fabric? George once described it to me like this. He said, data fabric, he said, people don't want a single product line, and they don't even want multiple product lines. What they want is an architecture from a company that they can trust will help them with multiple product lines, multiple generations of product lines. What holds them together? What ties them into a unified way of thinking such that you can plan and go forward into the future? That's what data fabric is. And so we've got these different areas that we're investing. We've got ways of moving data. We've got ways of getting access to compute without moving data. And we've added a few of the elements of the fabric, but we're adding more. I think the very first year, 2014, is when we first announced that we were doing stuff in the cloud. And it was the early vision stage. I think it was, like Adam said, it was that zone of like, are you guys crazy? Or what? There was a lot of skepticism, and here we are 3 years later, and I look at the richness of what we've done so far. We're not done by any stretch of the imagination, but the richness of what we've done, I think, shows, yeah, we're headed somewhere. And I think perhaps the most significant announcement from yesterday was Microsoft saying, yeah, you know, to accomplish what we think is possible in the cloud, we need to work with NetApp. We've made so much progress. I just feel awesome about where we are. And so, a few closing thoughts. I would encourage anybody who's trying to figure out their future strategy, where they're going, how do they want to manage these different aspects of the data center or styles of infrastructure. I would say start with the cloud and work backward. And here's why I say that. Not because my advice is all of you should be in the cloud everywhere. Maybe somebody shouldn't. Very few people aren't in the cloud at all, I have to say. But I don't know how much is appropriate. I don't know your business situation. But if you look at the cloud, it is so far leading the thought process on what we can do with compute. If you don't understand what the cloud can do and then plan backward, I think you're at grave risk of working your way into a hole, into a dead end. You should understand what the cloud can do. Having understood it, you may choose not to use it now. But at least you should be thinking, what if I did need in the future to use it? Am I laying the groundwork for that? So that's thought number one. Number two, This is a journey. This is not a step-by-step prescription. I'll tell you, I've had fun conversations with people. I drew this IaaS Plus layer. I didn't drive it back into configured, because typically I don't see people doing that. But I was talking with one guy, and he said, you know, we had a big Hadoop environment. We actually started small in the cloud. We bought it back on-prem to a private cloud. But this Hadoop application became so critical to our whole model that we decided to build a configured, bare metal Hadoop environment. He said, if I understand your model, that goes right here, doesn't it? We move this way. Now, I didn't update my picture, because that's not the normal path that I see, but the picture accommodates it. I think the power of this picture is for people to argue, where should we be? Where could this go? Is that a path you can move or not? One of our customers, Technology One from Australia, a big software company in Australia, and they started as a traditional, they build software, you get it over, you know, CD-ROM or the internet, and run it yourself, and they wanted to evolve to a cloud model. And they moved into Amazon initially with no NetApp, and then they added NetApp ONTAP Cloud to hold their data, compressed the data, deduped it, it was actually cheaper. And then eventually they ran into performance constraints that weren't fast enough, so they went to the data near the cloud model that I described earlier, using an Equinix data center. And then it was interesting, once they had that, it turned out to do business with the Australian government had a rule, you have to be able to offer a cloud service in 2 different clouds. The Australian government was trying to push against monopoly, and so you have to be able to offer your service in 2 different clouds to do business with us. Because they had the foundation of storage near the cloud, they could port their software over to Azure as well, and have an Amazon Azure by location, same data, flip the apps back and forth, and meet that requirement. So think about what they did. They started outside the cloud. They moved 100% inside the cloud. They moved half in and half out of the cloud, and then half in and half out of the cloud, straddling 2 clouds. And NetApp helped them every step of the way. And that leads me to my final point. I would argue that NetApp is the data authority. I'm not saying we've done that with all of our customers. I'm not even saying we have the bandwidth to do it with all of our customers at the scale we've done it with some, but we are learning, and we are getting a lot of good experience. And I would say, please work with us on this. We would love to partner with you and help you on this. Thank you. So we have a full day of conference ahead of us. Let's go change the world with data.
I need you right now.